Welcome to VCR, Vintage Cinema Rewind. We're bringing old movies to new viewers. I'm Blake.
And I don't have a quote to start
Well,
this
life
episode
does
off.
not stop and start with you, Michael.
That's true. It really doesn't. I wish it would, but it does not.
We're covering one of our favorite movies of all time, The Big Lebowski. This is our deep dive episode, so we're going to talk a lot of spoilers coming at you very soon.
We're going deep. Hey,
Yeah.
here's a question for you. If there was a porn parody of this podcast, what would it be called? Mike on the... No.
No, it would have to be VCR.
Yeah, it'd have to be VCR related,
Yeah.
I guess.
Vintage.
C word. Revving. Let's just let that sit at the back of our
Yeah,
brains
okay,
and come
let's
back to
drop
it.
that one.
I will say gutter balls. As soon as whenever gutter balls comes on screen during that dream sequence,
You're
I'm
like, nice.
nice.
I like log jamming personally,
Yeah.
but that's just me.
I just love when Maud's showing it to him, and she's like, "The plot is ridiculous," and she's like, "You can imagine where it goes from here." And the dude's like, not really paying attention. He's like, he fixes the cable. Like,
yeah, it's part of the dry sarcasm that he has.
yeah,
right?
yeah,
So-
for sure.
And that's something that, okay, we'll talk spoilers now. So that was your last warning for no spoilers. But that's kind of the thing with the dude, is that even though he's like this stoner guy who's kind of always two steps behind everything, he is like very witty.
The moment that made me fall in love with the dude for the first time, and the moment that continuously makes me fall in love with him every time I watch this movie, is that early scene when those thugs stick his head in the toilet, like, "Where's the money, Lebowski? Where's the money, shithead?" And he's just like, it's down there. Let me take another look.
He's a man who is just like, be on principle. He is a man on principle who has no time for the man. Any like authoritative figures who want to like push against what the dude is doing, he will just like push back. He has no problem with pushing back against any authoritative figures.
I think what I like about the dude so much is that, like, you know, we're still young men, and there's all this pressure to like earn and achieve and build a legacy and make a name for ourselves and like buy property and pass on our DNA and like
Yep.
cover up our bald spots. Maybe that one's just me. But like the dude is just so content with himself.
Yeah.
He seems so happy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, what's his goal at the beginning of the movie? He just wants his rug back.
Yeah.
Or he just wants a new rug, right?
Yeah.
For his shitty little apartment.
Yeah.
You
That
know?
he can't even pay rent on.
that was another great moment where that weird guy comes in, tells him about how he got a venue for his dance, and it would really mean a lot if the dude would go.
Yeah. But that also
But-
like
but then the guy's like, "By the way, the dude, it's already the 10th," and he's just like, "Far out." And then they look at each other for him. He's like, "Oh right, yeah." And then he's like, "Just stick it under my door.
Yeah.
Stick the rent under my door, right?"
that's the other thing that I want to say about the dude, is that I think that one argument could be that the dude is kind of using this guy and kind of preying on their friendship a little bit. But on the other end, like, I think the dude is somebody who just like genuinely like cares about the people in his life. Like, I think that
Yeah.
this guy, this weird, bizarre landlord guy, him and the dude have like this rapport, and the dude, like, I think genuinely went to go see his thing as like a friend, right?
He did. He definitely went, right?
Yeah.
And then for me, I think it was less, I saw it more as like, the dude is just so in his own world, he just forgot
Yeah.
what day it was.
Yeah.
I feel like he had the money, he just forgot about it.
Well, that's kind of the thing, right? Is like later on in the movie, a few scenes later, when he's talking to Jeffrey Lebowski, and Jeffrey's like, what are you doing on a Thursday? And he's like, what day is it today?
he's like, are you looking for a job? Like, who goes out like that on a weekday? And he's just like, what day is it again?
Yeah.
Yeah. I did also love when the Big Lebowski is just tearing him a new asshole about being a bum.
And he
how
just puts the glasses on. Like, the glasses are just like the sign of I've checked out.
Yeah, right? And then he leaves the office, and Brandt's like, "Oh, how'd it go?" He's like, "Oh, it went great. He told me I could take any rug I want." And then he just
That's one of the greatest punchlines to the
Yeah,
end of a
yeah,
scene
yeah.
I've ever seen.
So, yeah, should we talk about Brandt, actually? You said you had Brandt things to say.
I want to finish talking about the dude a little bit more.
Okay.
Before we get into some of the other characters. Like, I think that what's really interesting about the dude, and this kind of goes into legacy a bit, but I think that we could come full circle on this now, is that there's a whole religion around the dude called dudism at this point.
I have heard, yes. Me and my friends in college discovered this, and we had a lot to say about it.
I can kind of see how people would like get into this kind of way of thinking, right? Because he's such a like non-confrontational, like kind of do as you would do.
He identifies as a pacifist.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Well, although that may have just been his way of getting out of the draft, but he identifies as a pacifist.
Right. It's funny because I mentioned a couple of the guys were asking what movie we were doing next on the podcast, and I said The Big Lebowski, and the one guy, while we were playing Magic, was kind of snickered, and he was like, I think that maybe you wouldn't be surprised by this, but I think that I model a lot of my life on the dude and what the dude represents in that movie. And I laughed and I was like, maybe you are surprised by this, but I would also say that I model some of my life off of the dude. And like, the way
you're
the
actually
dude moves through
out
life.
of all my friends, you're closest. No, there's one more who's closer, but you're pretty close to the dude.
I actually am right now wearing a tank top and a sweatshirt to like channel my inner dude on this episode.
That was not lost on me.
And that's something that as we get to the end of the movie and we talk about that, like I do borderline find this movie to be inspirational in a very bizarre way. But I'm going to talk about that in more detail as we kind of wind down this part of the conversation.
Well, the dude is almost like a Christ figure in a weird way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like there's that moment when early on when he's about to start bowling and he like lifts his arms and like leans back to like stretch his back out.
Right.
And it lingers on that image for a few seconds too long. And I'm like, oh, it's what my old film professor used to say. If a character ever T-poses, they're signaling that they're Jesus. You know what I mean? So
what if they do it while standing on their head? Does that mean they're the devil?
Yes. That's exactly if he's doing a handstand and doing it, that's the Antichrist. And you need to turn the movie off right away. But yeah, by the way, I just want to say I'm on the dudism.com website, and do you want to hear what the opening log line is?
Yes.
Come join the slowest growing religion in the world, Dudism, an ancient philosophy that preaches non-preachiness, practices as little as possible, and above all, lost my train of thought there.
Love it. I absolutely love it. Yeah, no, we can talk about Brandt now. So this is one of my favorite performances by Philip Seymour Hoffman. This is a character that has way more depth than it has any right in having because of Philip Seymour Hoffman.
I think that's why it's kind of hard to like look away from him when he's on screen, right?
Yeah. Like you can tell that he's thought for weeks about this character and like what this character's up to when he's not on screen and like how he presents himself to different people who aren't in this movie, right? Like I see Brandt, so Brandt's essentially like the butler for Jeffrey Lebowski.
Yeah, like the Alfred, the assistant, right?
Yeah. And like it's so funny because the way that he's introduced, he's like, you know, he's having this discussion with the dude before he's admitted into Jeffrey's office. And you can tell that like Brandt is somebody who is a people pleaser, right? He is in a role where he is trying to make anyone in front of him feel like $1 million.
He's sort of, he really is like he's a corporate yes man.
Yeah.
Like you could find a guy like this in any office building, right?
Yeah.
But I think the big reveal towards the end of the movie is that the Big Lebowski himself is just as much a loser as the dude.
Right.
Like it's really his daughter who is running the foundation and keeping things going.
Yeah, and it was his late wife who actually like accumulated all this wealth.
Yeah, so I mean, and there's kind of an interesting like feminist critique of this movie where like he's clearly like he puts on airs and clearly pretends he's a much bigger fish than he actually is, but he's a real paper tiger behind the scenes. Mm-hmm. It's funny, he mentions giving Bunny, his wife, a reasonable allowance. But then later on, Maud, his daughter, the real powerhouse behind everything, is like, oh, I give him an allowance that I give my father an allowance, and that's it, right?
Yeah.
So then that reveal makes Brandt more interesting later on, because then you're like, does Brandt know what a loser his boss really is?
That's a really interesting thought, yeah.
Yeah, or like, is he in Maud's employ, or is he in Jeff Lebowski's employ, right?
Right.
Because there are moments where Brant seems genuinely deferential to the Big Lebowski. Like,
Yes.
during his big scene where he's talking to the fireplace and he's like, strong men do cry, and like Mozart is playing, you see like the dude is like smoking a joint and barely paying attention.
Yeah.
But then at one point we cut to Brant and he has his head bowed very
Yes.
solemnly. Like, I'm just like, is Brant in on the joke, or like does he know, or like what's going on here, right?
And that's where I kind of go back to, like, Brant is a chameleon in a sense, right? Like, he is whoever around him needs.
Yeah, and there's also that great moment, really the only scene with Bunny where she talks or has like a significant speaking role.
Yeah.
She says to the dude, "I'll suck your dick for $1,000." Brant brays out this very forced laughter. He's like, "Ha, wonderful woman. We're all very fond of her.
Yeah.
Very free spirited." And then she's just like, "Brant has to pay $100 if he wants to watch." And he just kind of laughs again. You're like, okay, like, interesting. Like, is she fucking with him, or is this a real thing that has happened?
Yeah, right.
I couldn't say.
Yeah. I also want to just pitch this here that I think that Brant is actually the only one on cocaine in this movie.
You think he might be on cocaine?
I think several of the scenes, and I could point to specific ones, where Brant, the character, has just done a line.
Okay. Hit me
That's
with
just
one.
my pitch. Like,
I'm not disagreeing, but hit me with one.
there are just like points where he's just like jittery almost, in a sense. Like, I'm trying to think of which one is probably best, but it's probably honestly the scene that you mentioned, like where the dude is summoned because Bunny has disappeared.
Right.
And he's like almost mocking, like it feels like he's almost mocking the Jeffrey Lebowski by like how he's acting around him. But I think that's just because the guy has done a line at that point. And even points where like he's laughing like crazily, like when Bunny's talking to him. I'm like, did you just like, while you were waiting for the dude and Jeffrey to like finish, did you just go do a line in the washroom and like you came out? Because that crazy laugh, like that energy that he has in that one moment is a little bit different than the energy that he had bringing the dude in.
Yeah.
So I
kind
think that low key, the character of Brant is a bit of a cokehead.
I could see it. There are also moments where like, so the dude is very much like, whenever people call him Mr. Lebowski, he's like, no, you're like, when the Big Lebowski calls him Mr. Lebowski, he's like, no, man, like, you're Mr. Lebowski. I'm the dude, or like his dudeness, or El Duderino.
Right.
But the Big Lebowski keeps calling him Mr. Lebowski. Brant, it's funny though, actually honors his request and calls him dude.
Yeah.
So there's some very serious, like, there's that great scene where he's in the backseat of their car and Brant looks so disapproving. He's like, we've been frantically trying to reach you, dude.
Yeah. Well, and that's what, again, goes back to like what I was saying. Like, I think that he's a people pleaser, and that's the role that he's in, because he's like primarily a service industry worker, right?
I guess there is that, like, when we first meet Brant, he's showing off this wall of accomplishments for like all the cool things Mr. Lebowski has done.
Yep.
He's also like, hey, don't touch that.
Yeah.
Like, he's showing it off. So I'm like, okay, Brant, he's probably being paid to do this.
Right.
Mr. Lebowski's probably like, make sure you show him my wall of accomplishments, which
Yeah.
we later learn are fake accomplishments. But
Yes.
like, yeah.
That's kind of the thing, right? Is like, I think that he's a really fascinating character for all of these reasons. Like, I'm glad that you and I had a Brant corner.
Yeah, I was just like, wow, Brant, there's a lot going on with this guy, right?
Yeah. And
So-
that's, again, what Philip Seymour Hoffman brings to a role.
And it's weird because like I kind of go both ways on Brant, where I'm like, I could see him being just a cokehead, just doing his job, who like secretly hates himself and hates his life, but just needs the money.
Yeah.
I could also see Brant. There are moments that seem like shockingly sincere, though.
Yeah.
You know, like even that scene we talked about, the fireplace scene where the Big Lebowski is crying or even pretending to cry and saying all this stuff.
Yeah.
And then when he basically is like, leave me, the dude stumbles out of the room and Brant, like, he very ceremonially closes the door, like bows, grabs both hands, and like closes the double doors with both hands.
Yeah.
Like he's almost bowing as he's leaving.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, so it's weird. There are moments that seem like shockingly sincere from Brant.
I think you could be very good at your job in the service industry, but also be able to turn it off, because I can sometimes see myself doing that.
See Brant turning it off. Yeah, I do work in the service industry part-time now. It's one of my jobs, and sometimes I have to turn it on.
Yeah.
But it turns itself off pretty quickly.
Yeah, exactly. So I think you can both be very good and sincere while you're doing it, but also like it is a little bit of performative. Like any service related job is a little bit performative.
Yeah. A lot of life is performative.
Yeah, for sure.
So
and the dude is not a performer. Like that's part of the charm to him, right? Is he is just
himself. Yeah.
Talking about people who are themselves, where do we land on Walter?
That's a good question. I think Walter has always kind of been my favorite character in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
But I will actually note that I liked him a lot less this time around. Maybe just because as I've gotten older and I've matured a little bit and I've developed some empathy and I've had some life experiences, I'm kind of like, I did have a couple of moments in this movie where I'm like, why the fuck does the dude keep him around? Like, he just makes everything worse. It's funny, though. There's that great scene where they've tried to shake down this high school kid for like knowledge of where the money is.
Larry.
And that's the great line. Do you see what happens, Larry? Do you see what happens, Larry? This is what happens when you find a stranger in the Alps. And then, so Walter completely screws the whole thing up. Then later we cut to the dude. He's like hammering a piece of wood into the floor because he's trying to protect his apartment. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
And then
because the door opens the other way.
Right? Which again, that's another one of those pitch perfect jokes. But
yeah.
The dude's talking to him on the phone. He's like, "Yes, Walter, I accept your apology. No, Walter, I don't think he was about to crack." And then he kind of loses his temper. He's like, "Fuck you." He says something like, "Fuck you, Walter. Don't talk to me anymore." Pause. "Yes, I'll see you at practice tomorrow."
Yeah. It's the perfect, like, fuck you and I'll see you tomorrow.
Yeah,
like,
fuck
part.
you and I'll see you tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
And, like, I'm sure there are friendships like that that are caustic.
Yeah.
That they still are somewhat functional.
It's like a brotherly love, right?
I suppose. And I've never had a brother, so
yeah,
maybe I don't get it. But, yeah, no. I mean, Walter, there's also something very tragic about Walter.
I think Walter is the most tragic character of the entire movie.
Yeah, so again, like we're assuming you've seen this movie, and if you haven't, like, fuck off, go watch it. But so like he's a Vietnam War vet, probably greatly traumatized by what happened to him.
Yeah.
By the way, this is like the 1990s. So how long had Vietnam been over by then?
So here's the thing: is these guys? This was probably a question that I had for you. Like, how old do you think these guys are approximately?
I like at least 40s, like at least 10 or 15, like at least 10 years older than we are.
Yeah, I would have guessed that these guys are probably
like maybe late 40s.
I would guess late 40s. I'm putting them around 48ish,
Yeah.
which would put at 48 in 1991 would have Walter old enough to be involved in Vietnam.
So it's probably been at least like what 15, 20 years since Vietnam.
Yeah, about that approximately.
Yeah, so like, and I need to be careful because I don't like a lot of people have trauma from war, and
Yeah.
I really, really, really am
But
not.
his is like again performative in a sense.
Yeah, like it's almost like this is a guy who just can't move on, right?
Yeah.
So the other funny thing about Walter is that he was divorced 5 years ago, but he still apparently runs errands for his wife.
Right. Watches her dog.
Right. He also converted to Judaism for her, and now post-divorce, he's still a practicing Jew.
He's got one like foot in his relationship still, essentially.
Yeah, right? Which, I've never been divorced. I guess it's hard to just move on like that. But like, there's that great moment when the dude is like, "You're not even Jewish, shut up." And he's like, "Oh, I'm not even Jewish? Is it like a library card that I just hand back?" Right? And he's like, "You're living in the past, man." He's like, "Of course I'm living in the fucking past. It's a 3,000-year tradition all the way back to Moses." But yeah, like Walter is clearly still living in the past. Like he's still living in Vietnam. He's still living in his marriage, and he's still practicing a religion that he only joined for his wife.
Yeah.
Ex-wife, excuse me.
It doesn't ever seem like he's very content in any of this.
No, he's very... That's the other thing I noticed more about Walter this time around is just the anger bleeding off this guy.
Yeah.
He's more upset about the dude's rug getting peed on than the dude himself.
Yeah.
Right?
Out of the principle of the matter. Like, he is somebody who would be offended by just about anything.
Right. And then it's like there's that great scene where they're having coffee together at a diner, and he's like flying off the handle again about the principle of Bunny maybe kidnapping herself.
Right.
The waitress comes over. She's like, "You need to keep your voice down. Like, this is a family restaurant." And he's like,
Yeah.
"I had friends who died in the muck so we could even have this coffee," right?
Yeah.
And then he's just like, "I'm not leaving. I'm just drinking my coffee."
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's just, this is a guy who, and I think it's funny. I'm actually going to tell a story from my life. Oh, it's an anecdote from old Michael's. So I work as a server at some restaurant, and one of my co-workers is this guy named, let's call him Gary. Big guy, like 6'4", jacked, bald, big old beard, pretty scary looking. Actually, probably close to Walter's age. Like probably, like I think he's close to 50. And he quit in the most spectacular fashion the other night. He was screwing a bunch of I was kind of doing my own thing, taking care of my own tables. I was only tangentially, I was Donnie. I was only tangentially aware of what was going on.
Yeah.
So one of the managers was like kind of chewing him out, like, "You screwed this up and you screwed this up," and like blah, 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 blah. This guy went ballistic. He started screaming at her, being like, "You're a fucking bitch. Nobody likes you. You're a stupid fucking C word." And he was just, we were all just like, whoa.
It's kind of like a stop and like
everybody
watch
stop
the
and
explosion.
stare moment, right? We were all just like, whoa. Keep in mind, big guy, right?
Yeah.
Big guy. So we're all just like, it's like this older man, and again, he's bald. It's like his face turned into a tomato while he was yelling.
Right.
Kind of funny. But I remember just being like, this guy's like 20 years older than me, and even I know that's not okay.
Right.
Like, teenagers know that's not okay, right?
Yep.
So in watching this movie the other night kind of reminded me of that moment where I'm like, oh, this guy's just like, he's just, and again, beyond Gary, quote unquote.
Well, and sorry to hijack this slightly. This came to me though, but this is a movie about being stuck in a point in time. And that kind of even is in the opening monologue, that the dude is stuck at a specific point in time.
Right.
Walter is trapped at a point in time in his life, and he can't move on from it. Like, really the biggest growth that I think we see of him is him be vulnerable after Donnie passes away.
Which was another fantastic scene. But yeah, again, what I just want to say about Walter is that he's just, I think we've all met guys like Walter. Is just guys who, like, to quote Bill Burr, it's like they're idling at 75.
Yeah.
Like, it's not gonna, okay, like, when was the last time you saw me angry?
It's a great question.
Yeah.
Literally never.
I don't think I've seen you angry in years either, but like, we all know guys who like
it doesn't take a lot to poke.
It doesn't take a lot for them to go fucking ballistic.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So anyways, yeah, that's Walter. And yeah, like, as much as contempt and pity as I have for Walter, there's also quite a lot of sympathy for the guy too.
That's exactly where I was getting to at as well, right? Like, he's a character that you pity.
Yeah, like, you can there's actually things to admire about the dude.
Yeah.
There's things you pity about Walter though.
Yeah.
Right? I will say though, he does have the funniest lines in the whole movie.
Oh, easily.
Like, also, dude, Asian American is the preferred nom culture. Yeah.
Okay, and that actually brings up a point that I did want to talk about, in that this is I think one of the most well-written dialogue films and conversationalist films ever made. And part of that is because the characters kind of talk over each other, right? Like, there's a natural dialogue. Like, this feels natural, more natural than most other films, because they're all kind of talking, and you kind of like, you catch bits and pieces of each person as they're having a conversation. Like, you honestly, a lot of the time, the cameraman feels like the fourth bowler.
Basically, yeah. Like, and again, it's like, just even that movie clip scene we brought up. It's so funny how, like, the dude and Walter are like nattering at each other and not hearing each other, and then there's Donnie who's just barely keeping up.
Yeah.
Walter's telling him to shut the fuck up. Like,
yeah.
I will say, actually, just one more thing on Walter. Like, as crazy as he is, he's right. He figures out the mystery at the end, Like, he was right the whole time.
Well, he was and he wasn't. So I I have been on that for a long time. So there's it's funny because I watch this movie and every time there's like little things that I forget about. Like, for example, I forget about how I feel every single time immediately when they call the dude and they're like, "Hey, we really need you to come give us a hand with the situation that we've got ourselves into." Even as many times as I've seen this movie, there's a brief thought that goes through my head that goes, "Why the hell did they call the dude to take care of this?"
Right.
And then I go, "Oh yeah, because everything else that's about to happen in this movie."
Right.
But it just feels like so bizarre that a man like Jeffrey Lebowski would recruit such like somebody who he just looks so down upon to solve this problem or assist him with this problem.
Yeah,
right?
and they try to hand wave it at the beginning. We're like, well, you've met these thugs before, so you might recognize them.
And that even barely holds up as like
it's like,
valid theory.
I remember like, yeah, it's one of those things where it's like it just barely works for a motivation. Where you're like, what? All right, but then. No, but like Walter is right about a lot of things that happen,
yeah,
right? Like
right.
He's the one who speculates that Bunny kidnapped herself.
Oh, I think that was the dude. I think the dude kind of nonchalantly was like kind of
right. That was
it.
the dude.
But then Walter's the one who locks in on that and is like, "You know what, dude? You're actually probably right."
Right. But then it's funny when the dude is like pulling back. He's like, "I'm only saying I think that's what might have happened." Walter's like, "Ah, come on."
Yeah.
There's also that great line where they show him the toe, and Walter's just like, "Could be anybody's toe." He's like,
yeah.
he's like, I could get you I could get you a toe, but there's ways I could get you a toe by 3 p.m. with nail polish.
Yeah. But he's right. You're right. Like he sees like other, I guess, scenarios. Like he's somebody who can think his way through some of these problems relatively quickly. But it's funny because as a whole, if you look at this movie as a whole, they're actually wrong. They weren't correct. Like Bunny actually just did leave.
She just dipped.
She dipped.
Just fucked right off without saying anything.
Yeah, it's all of these other characters who are taking advantage of this situation and the long line of people taking advantage of the situation, right?
Yeah.
And it's actually the dude who later on also figures out that the money probably wasn't in the suitcase.
Yeah, actually, that's right. It's the dude who cracks everything at the end.
Yeah.
Right? And
yeah.
he's right. So Walter's he's sort of right, sort of not.
Yeah.
There's also that great fucking moment where he's like, "This man isn't even crippled."
Okay, I have thoughts on that piece because I was thinking about that scene today as well. And I think that is actually one of the most pivotal moments in both Walter and Jeffrey Lebowski's entire narrative arc. And so give me a second for this one.
Okay.
But this is the scene that degrades Jeffrey Lebowski more than any other moment in this entire film.
Yeah.
And like you can make an argument that like obviously you shouldn't treat people who have disabilities like this, everything else. But at this point in time, Jeffrey Lebowski has it coming so hard that I cannot feel bad for him in this situation.
It's more just profound embarrassment.
Yeah.
Right?
And on the flip side, Walter, who has been flying off the handle this entire movie, and the dude at one point says, like, you are going to have to reckon with the fact that you're a moron at some point. And I think this is the one time where Walter flies off the handle and immediately feels embarrassed by it.
Yeah, it's funny. He's like, "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. This man can walk." Boosh. And then he does even look kind of like, "Oh man, I thought he was faking it."
Yeah.
And then it's the dude who's like, "Come on, help me get him back in his chair."
Yeah, like it's wildly uncomfortable. And I think that's the first time. And I think that, and I've seen this, and I won't go into detail with this, but like I think this is like something that you go through in your early 20s where you feel invincible, you feel like, like you can do anything and say whatever you want and this and that, and it doesn't matter. And then when you see yourself do something that like hurts another human being and you go, "Oh, like that, my actions have consequences."
Yeah, I mean, we've all, like, if you've been in a relationship long enough, maybe you started an argument or you said something and then you're just like, "Ooh, like, I'm not proud of myself right now." Right? I've obviously never done that because I'm perfect. Yeah.
But yeah, like you get what I mean though. Like, and I think that that's really important to Walter's character arc is that moment there.
It's almost like, it's funny, and I'm just kind of articulating this now. There's also that great scene where they see the nice car parked out front of Larry's house and they assume that this kid stole the $1 million and bought himself a really swanky car with it.
Yeah.
So then they're not getting anything out of the kids. So Walter grabs a golf club and starts smashing the car to pieces. That's the famous, do you see what happens, Larry? Do
Yeah.
you see what happens when you fuck a stranger in the ass? Turns out it's the neighbor's car.
Yeah.
And in retaliation, the neighbor smashes the dude's car. So it's almost like Walter almost has decent instincts, just wildly incorrect actions. You know what I mean?
Correct. Well, and it's funny because even like reflecting on a scene like that, like we should know that that's not what happened in this situation, right?
Right.
Based on how everyone else in the scene is acting. I can't remember if that's his wife when she like comes to the door.
I think it's like just the maid or
Yeah,
something.
but like, so I don't know where Larry's mom is, if she's even in the picture at this point in time.
Yeah.
But I feel like even the maid, if the maid would know that something has gone on if this kid shows up with this like $100,000 car, right? And so I would be inherently questioning of these two guys showing up at their house to see Larry. Like she would not have let them in the door if something funky was going on, right?
Yeah, right. It's almost kind of like Walter wants to be the hero of this movie, but he's just too inept.
Yeah.
Or like he wants to be this John Rambo badass action hero. Like there's that great moment where he wants to like roll out of the moving car and like shoot the bad guys with the Uzi. I don't know how he didn't like break his hip.
Mhm.
And then the Uzi slips out of his gas and like just like starts discharging wildly and like, you know, and then he gets up, he's like, fuck it, let's go bowling.
Yeah.
Like it's almost like Walter wants to be the hero of this movie, but he just can't.
Yeah.
He's too, although I will say, now that I'm saying that, he does lay a smackdown on the nihilists at the end of the movie. He kicks the shit out of them.
Which is so cathartic for me. I love that's like one of my favorite scenes of Walter in the entire movie because, like you said, he puts the smackdown on them.
Right. And it's kind of just, it's one of those moments where you're like, oh, I guess he did go to Vietnam.
Yeah.
Like he is an ex-Marine.
The
you know?
bowling ball into Flea is like one of the greatest starts to a fight I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Because it just goes from 0 to 100. Like they're kind of yelling at each other. The car's obviously on fire and everything. And you're just like, how is this going to go? Because we've seen this guy like fly off the handle. Is he going to back up like what he's been doing?
Yeah.
And he just like throws
Beats
the
the
bowling
shit out of
ball
them.
and then beats them up. Yeah.
Although I will say, you know, now that I'm saying that though, all they wanted was like whatever cat. So the nihilists are like, they wanted their $1 million. They have to explain to them there was no $1 million. So then the nihilists are like, well, that's not fair. Like his girlfriend had to cut her toe off. And then Walter's like, I thought you guys were nihilists. Like, what are you whining about?
They're literally whining. Like that's part of the best part. Is they're like, but that's not fair.
Yeah. It's like fair. Like he calls them like a bunch of like whiners and then the nihilists converge among themselves, and they're like, well, how much cash do you guys have on you? So, like, I think they had, like, between the three of them, they had, like, $16.
Yeah.
If they'd just given them the $16, they would have left, and Donnie wouldn't have had a heart attack.
Well, that's another good point, right? Is like, when did Donnie's heart attack actually start? Because there is kind of some allusion to that in like the scene immediately prior to that, because he doesn't get his strike where we've seen him strike out every single time.
Oh, that went completely over my head.
Yeah, there's like something's amiss. Like, you know, like he bowls and there's that look on his face where he's like, huh. And then he actually goes back and sits down and he's actually rubbing his arm after that.
Okay, so maybe the heart attack would have happened anyway.
So there's a question of whether the heart attack would have happened or not before then. Like, the movie is definitely, from an artistic standpoint, like foreshadowing that something
terrible is going to happen to Donnie,
yes.
Right? Yeah, but no, I mean, Walter does kick the living shit out of those guys. Granted, they didn't look too intimidating, but I couldn't take 3 guys in a fight.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I also just love that, like, the one guy's trying to fight the dude. He's like, I fuck you in the ass. I fuck you in the ass. And the dude's like holding up his bowling ball. He's like, come on, man. I'm going to hit you with my bowling ball. And he's like, just take the money.
Yeah.
By the way, if I was ever to fight, that's how I'd be reacting. I'd be like, just take my money. God, go away.
I mean, on the flip side, though, we have seen previously, like, the nihilists show up at the dude's house.
So they are dangerous, right?
Yeah.
So,
I mean, like, I couldn't imagine, like, what is that? Like a meerkat or something? Like, gets thrown into...
ferret?
Gets thrown into, like, the bathtub with him. Like, that, honestly, that makes me squirm every time, that scene.
Yeah, that was harsher than I remembered it being, so...
Yeah.
Anyways, yeah, Walter, not the action hero he wants to be, but enough of an action hero to beat up three guys.
Yeah.
I did a little bit of research, which was unlike me, and I know that they're originally in the original script, originally in the first draft, they were going to reveal that Walter was a fake,
Yes.
that he had never been to Vietnam.
Yeah.
And you know what? I think that would have been a mistake.
I agree.
I think him being an actual veteran who can't move on is way more compelling.
Yeah, I very much agree.
If he's just some asshole who's like, I think they call that stolen valor.
Yeah.
Yeah, if he's just some stolen valor asshole, it kind of deflates the character.
It makes him a little bit more sinister, right?
Yeah, I think you need that pity and that tragedy in order to make a guy like Walter somewhat likable. And then yeah, the fucking funeral scene too.
Yeah.
Right? It's should we talk about that?
Yeah, no, let's dive into that for sure. It feels like, in one sense of, I think the first time that you see this movie, it's like Donnie dying is pretty gutting. Like, it's pretty upsetting.
It's more upsetting than it almost doesn't make sense how sad it is, you know what I mean? And it's like, as a narrative turn, it's so strange because he is so not even really a part of the plot.
Mm-hmm.
He's in the car when the guy's beating on it.
Yeah.
That's about it. But like, he's really just a supporting character who has no real idea what's going on.
Yeah, and barely an identity in this film.
Yeah, he's just the guy they tell to shut the fuck up.
Yeah.
But then he just has a heart attack. It dies.
Yeah.
And it's strangely, very gut-wrenching.
And I think the first time you watch it, you might think, well, I bet you like the Coen brothers just thought up this like really funny bit where Walter like throws all of the ashes and it goes back and like covers
the dude,
because that is hilarious. Like, that's
really funny.
That's in the darkest way possible. That is hilarious.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the more and more that I've seen this movie, the more that I've come to acknowledge how I find profound the ending of this movie, and how really this kind of ties into the larger theme of the movie and what I've taken out of this movie. Because I look at all of this and I go, these three characters are three friends who have a passion, who, you know, it's not like they're moving mountains in the world. They're
just doing their thing.
Yeah, they're just doing their thing. They're just existing and having fun and, you know, like just enjoying life. And I think that this goes to like the theme of this movie and like everything kind of leading up to this is that life is short and you don't know like when you're going to go, right? And I think that, you know, seeing Donnie go out the way that he does is just like kind of a reminder of that, of like, you know, do what you love because you don't know when you're not going to be able to do what you love anymore.
Yeah, I did also just love the line when they're about to scatter his ashes and Walter says, and so Theodore Donald, I can't pronounce the last name, Karabastos, in accordance with what we think your dying wishes might have been, we commit your final mortal remains to the bosom of the Pacific Ocean.
Yeah.
Good night, sweet prince.
I think a lot of that, like over time, like over watches and everything, has become a lot more profound for me and has kind of justified Donnie's death and made it maybe part of the most important part of the entire movie, I think, is him dying. And I don't think that this movie actually would have even been as good as it is without his death, because
it really ties the movie together.
It does,
yeah.
I think, because it leaves on that poignant note, like that life is short and that you should do what you love. And that's something that, like, you know, I've kind of carried on in my own life, is like I do what I want and I do it when I want, and like I don't kind of let all of the
noise,
the noise of life kind of distract me from the things that I love.
Again, it's funny but tragic in a weird way, where it's like, you know, they see Donnie writhing on the ground. The dude's like, "Oh my God, did he get shot?" And he's like, "No, there was no gunfire. He's having a heart attack."
Right.
It's just like, oh,
yeah,
right.
Even despite like how wacky and eccentric all this stuff is, like at the end of the day, it goes back to like these people are human.
Yeah, they're just doing their thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on that end, so I don't know if you had any other thoughts about that.
I don't know that I went into. Maybe this is just what I'm going through in life right now. I saw it more as sad that like this poor guy who nobody paid attention to just died, and that his funeral was so pathetic. And like it seems like Walter and Donnie were the only ones there, so like this guy didn't really have much of a family or life outside of them to speak of. So I saw it as kind of sad, but I like your reading of it better. That like
Mm-hmm.
he liked bowling, so he bowled.
Yeah.
And that's how he spent his life. And there's something noble about that.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, because at
Also-
the end of the day, 5 minutes after, the like that sermon or whatever, like Donnie has, like his ashes to ashes. He has, moved on from this world. And so like, it doesn't really matter what happens after. It's what you're doing while you're here that matters, kind of thing.
Yeah, I guess so. And I mean, as someone who's been to many funerals, like there is something imperfect and awkward about funerals.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
It never fully captures the full spirit of who you were.
And like at the end of the day, the two guys like kind of hug it out. They have their moment, and they go and do what really would honor Donnie is they go
Yeah.
bowling.
They go bowling. That final scene, actually, when they're just back at the bowling alley, is weirdly uplifting.
Yeah.
You know? Like the dude's in a really good mood. He orders a beer. He runs into Sam Elliott
Yep.
again, and he's like, oh, hey man. He's like, oh, it's good to see you again. I was wondering if I was going to see you again. They chat a little, and then
Mm-hmm.
we just move right on. You know?
Yeah, and I think that it's funny because Jess and I were watching this movie, and at the end she starts talking over while Sam Elliott's talking, and Sam Elliott's saying like how everything worked out all right, and Jess was like, well, I wish Donnie hadn't have died, and then and I was like, let the man finish.
Let the man speak.
And then he's like, it's a shame that what happened to Donnie, but then he was like, but that's the circle of life. Like you live.
Yeah, there's a little Lebowski on the way.
Yeah.
And what does he say? It's like that human comedy is gonna keep on going.
Yeah.
Right. And I take comfort in knowing that the dude is out there taking it easy for all us sinners.
Honestly, I think that's one of the most poetic endings to a movie ever.
Yeah, it's
I really truly love it.
Should we talk about Sam Elliott, the stranger, as
Yeah.
he's credited? That's another preposterous swing that really pays off. Like, so we get this opening narration. I'm going to read you some of it. I have it pulled up here. So we get Sam Elliott, kind of this old, seems like the hero, like the mentor in like an old Western.
Mm-hmm.
And he's talking about, he's like, way out west, there was this fella I wanted to tell you about. Fella by the name of Jeff Lebowski. And he goes on talking about like how he doesn't understand the dude and he doesn't understand Los Angeles, but there are some nice folks there, but he finds it interesting and like,
Mm-hmm.
And then he frames everything in the context of like the early 90s with the conflict with Saddam, and then
Yep.
and
Well, I mean, that pops up a few times in the movie too, right?
yeah, they do a good job reminding us of the time period.
Mm-hmm.
He says there's that great line where he's like, I only mention it because sometimes there's a man. I won't say a hero because what's a hero? But sometimes there's a man, and I'm talking about the dude here. Sometimes there's a man. Well, he's a man for his time and place. He fits right in there, and that's the dude in Los Angeles. And even if he's a lazy man, and the dude most certainly was that, quite possibly the laziest in Los Angeles County, which would place him high in the running for laziest worldwide. But sometimes there's a man. Sometimes there's a man. Oh, I lost my train of thought here. But oh, hell, I've done introduced him enough.
Yeah. Like that's a contender for one of the greatest opening monologues in a movie ever.
Yeah, it's almost kind of like in the same way the dude, when you get right down to it, and I think the Coen brothers have even said, this really is like a film noir story.
Yep.
The dude just isn't a film noir hero in the same way that it's almost like Sam Elliott is like a Western hero who like wandered into the wrong movie.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. He's trying to narrate for a different type of film and kind of acknowledges that, and he's just like, well, like we rolled with the punches at the end, and this is where we ended up, and I enjoyed myself.
Yeah, he's
so
just like, he's okay with it. There's that great line, we hear his dialogue and then we hear his narration, we get into the movie.
Yeah.
Then in like a weird meta moment, he's just at the bar with the dude and they have a weird conversation.
Yeah.
And he says that great line, sometimes you eat the bear, sometimes the bear eats you. And then the dude's like, was that some kind of Eastern thing? And he just goes, no, far from it. Yeah. So then he's just like, do you have to use so many cuss words?
So, and that's actually something that is really like I think really interesting about this movie as well is how much the dude absorbs around him. Like
Yeah.
the dude kind of moves through this world, picking up things around him, not necessarily even applying them correctly in other situations, but
Yeah.
he often repeats other things that he sees on TV or he hears other people say. He parrots a lot of things.
Right.
And I actually, after that scene, on this watch, I was like, I wonder if he's gonna start cursing less actually after this moment in time. And I wish that I had like started like a
Counter?
tally,
Yeah.
a counter to see if that, because he is somebody who does take feedback from people, surprisingly, as long as they're willing to like play ball at his level.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I like how someone will use a weird turn of phrase and he will repeat it back in a different context.
Right.
Sometimes like incorrectly, but
Yeah.
he'll repeat it to other people.
Yeah.
Which I think we all do. It's
Oh,
very
absolutely.
like naturalistic.
Yeah, for sure.
So that scene where he's having a beer with the stranger is like one of the weirdest but most compelling scenes in the movie.
Yeah, and that's like an almost fourth wall break. Like it feels like, there's kind of a wink to the audience at that point, and then at the end there is an actual fourth wall break.
Yeah, right. So then at the end, they're back at the bar. The stranger is sitting at the spot. They talk for a little bit. Then the camera pulls in on him and he plays us out. He looks directly into the
Yep.
He looks at us, the audience, and tells us what he thinks.
Yep.
It's very interesting.
Yeah.
He's like, I liked parts of it. Didn't much care for Donnie dying, but I'm happy to know that there's a little Lebowski on the way.
Yeah.
It actually, he speaks kind of highly of the dude at the end. It's almost like he gains some weird form of respect for him throughout the movie.
I mean, it's hard not to. Like he's the stand-in for the audience, right? And you do, by the end of this movie, really come to respect the dude and how he moves through this world.
I would hang out with the dude. Like, if I knew him in real life, I would hang out with him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's a cool guy.
We'd probably just have a good time. Yeah.
Just relax, go do some bowling.
Yeah.
Oh man, we've been talking about this for a while. So it's funny because I was thinking about this while we've been talking about this, is that this is really a story of characters.
That's a good point.
And that's how we've been framing this discussion, is based on the characters themselves and how each of them have interacted with other characters in this.
Yeah, really.
Are there any other characters that you want to really like deep dive into at this point in time? Like Jackie Treehorn, Maud Lebowski. We haven't talked about Jesus in a whole lot of detail.
I think we should talk about Maud a little more because she's a main player. She's actually, like, again, and other people have pointed this out. I can't take credit for that. Like, she's almost the real Big Lebowski of the movie.
Yeah, she is, actually.
She's this strange woman who is running her mother's foundation and seems to be like the real power. She's the real power behind the house, to use like maybe a Game of Thrones term that I vaguely remember, right? There's those great moments where like the first time we meet her, she's like flinging herself naked on like a harness over a canvas and just spraying paint at it.
Yeah,
and, like,
it's very like primal. Like there's like chanting almost going on. Like when he walks in there.
I remember thinking, like, watching that scene yesterday, being like, if I could write naked in a harness being flung over something by manservants, I would do it.
Yeah.
Every day I would do it. I'd be like, put me in my harness, guys.
Yeah.
Like, wish me luck. And then just like, and then she's like, oh, does like the female form make you uncomfortable? You know, she has actually some of the best dialogue in the whole movie. Just like her very weird, intelligent way of speaking.
Right.
Yeah. She's like, my art has been commended as being strongly vaginal, which bothers some men. The word itself makes some men uncomfortable. Vagina.
He's not faced at all. And so she comes to like strangely appreciate the dude. Like she is a feminist, and she says that like I am a feminist in the purest form of the word. And, you know, like she has her own issues with her father, and like there's some deep stuff going on there.
Right.
But she genuinely comes to respect the dude and his outlook on life.
Kinda, yeah. It's interesting. So the whole thing is like, you know,
he's very thorough.
So like one of her underlings punches the dude in the face, and later on she's like, I'm so sorry. Like, go see this doctor. He's very thorough. And he's like, okay. And then he doesn't. And she calls him there, being like, you haven't been to see the doctor. And he's like, well, no, I've been busy. She's like, no, you really need to go see the doctor. And then she kind of manipulates him into doing it, where she's like, I'd hate for you to have any delayed after effects. And he's like, what?
Yeah.
So then he goes, and it's this kind of middle-aged Indian doctor who's like, all right, take off your pants. he's like, no, man, it's my jaw. He's like, I know, take off your pants.
Yeah.
So it turns out she was basically grooming him to be like her seed bearer, seed giver. I don't know.
Yeah. However you want to put it, so that she can have a child with somebody who will have no aspirations to be a real father.
Yeah, she's basically just using him for his sperm.
Yeah.
Right? And then, like, there's that great moment, though, where they've just had sex and, like, they're talking. And, like, if you've ever had a regrettable one night stand with someone you have nothing in common with and you're trying to talk afterwards, you can relate to this moment where they're kind of like in each other's arms. And she's like, so, Jeffrey, like, what is it you do for work? And he's like, what does he say? He says something like, oh, you know, my career's slowed down lately.
Yeah.
No, he's like, I worked in the music industry. And she's like, oh, really? He's like, yeah, I was a roadie for Metallica.
And she's like, oh.
Yeah, and he's like, my career slowed down recently. And then he's also like talking about like being like a weird hippie like protester back like 20 years ago.
Right.
He's like, I was one of the Boston Seven.
Yep.
It was me and 6 other guys. She's
Mhm.
like, what do you do for leisure? And that's one of my favorite lines of the movie. He's like, oh, you know, the usual bowl, drive around, occasional acid flashback.
Yeah.
Right. And actually, no, I think one of my new favorite moments watching this movie again is when he has that confrontation with the private investigator who's been tailing him.
Right.
And he's like talking to me. He's like, hey, you know, I really love what you're doing. You're playing both sides. He's like, what you're doing with your special lady. He's like, she's not my special lady. She's my lady friend. I'm just helping her conceive. And the private investigator looks so stunned by the comment. Like he almost like, like he's.
Yeah.
Then he's like, stop calling her my special lady. She's my lady friend.
Yeah, and then he goes into hops on the bus or whatever it is. And
Yeah.
he's like, I've got to go find my special whatever
My lady friends,
Yeah.
whatever. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's so one of the funniest moments of the whole movie.
Yeah,
So yeah, it's funny. It's like she appreciates him and respects him, but like it's very clear that like as an actual couple, they would not work.
Oh, absolutely not.
Not even remotely.
No, not
they have
even.
no business being
No,
romantically involved.
no. Well, she has. Yeah,
Yeah, no kidding, right?
yeah,
It's pretty amazing. I
Yeah.
also, and again, one of my favorite scenes in the movie is when he goes to talk to her, and it's that guy you mentioned, the shame wizard, just
Yes.
sitting, looking at this book. We never see what he's looking at, and he just keeps intermittently giggling.
yes, and it's like psychotic. The giggles are like this man is probably a serial killer.
Right, and then the dude is so thrown by this because he's like, is he laughing at me? Is he laughing at what he's reading? Like,
Yeah.
At one point, he even says, like, what is with this guy?
Yeah, because I mean, you as the audience are like, what is happening right now? Like, this is such a bizarre character.
Yeah.
like in a movie full of bizarre characters, he kind of stands out as like,
The most preposterous.
yeah,
He's got the little pencil mustache. There's that great moment when he's like, oh, you must be Lebowski. He's like, come in. Do you want a drink? And the dude sits down. He's like White Russian. And he's just like, the bar's behind you. He just gets up, makes himself a drink.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is probably the best White Russian movie as well. So
I feel like any person who orders a White Russian has probably watched this movie.
it's in reference to this one. Yeah.
Yeah, I've never had one. Have you?
No, God,
They
no.
look kind of
It's like milk and
Kahlua
vodka.
and vodka. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would puke.
Not for me. Not
no,
for me.
I'll stick with bad, cheap beer. But yeah, no, I agree with what you just said. This movie is told in vignettes, but it's more about character than it is about plot.
Yeah.
It's more just a whole bunch of strange characters dancing around a pole together,
Yeah.
and the world is better for it.
Well, and do you want to get into effects and filming, or is there anything more you want to talk about plot? I mean, we could always come back.
I think we've pretty much hit the main players. Yeah.
So effects and filming, like really the Coen brothers who wrote this based most of these characters on real life people that they knew in their own personal lives.
That sounds terrifying. Oh my god.
Well, and it's a right what you know situation, but it's also like I think that's part of the reason why this movie is so intelligent and works at such a high level is because all of these characters, as absurd as they are, feel like real human beings that have real lives.
Mm-hmm.
For example, the dude is based on a character or a person named Jeff Dowd, who was a film producer and a political activist in the 70s. But they also had a friend who had an apartment that was really dumpy. He had a rug, and he always said that the rug tied the room together. Like, that's a direct quote from their real
Wow.
life.
Okay. It's a gift from God.
Maud's based on two people. She's based on a artist in, I don't remember which time period, but she was an artist that actually did do like the naked painting on the harness kind of thing. But she was also based on Oko Yono, which I find hilarious.
Yeah, that actually kind of makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, I was going to say as well that Jeff Bridges basically, like, when he was pitched this movie, was like, were you friends with me in high school? Like, he was like, this essentially, like, was who I was in my late teens and early 20s, was in the 60s and 70s. Like, I just was doing drugs in, like, some shitty apartment.
Yeah, that sounds like Jeff Bridges.
Yeah. So I think that, like, you know, there's so much inspiration coming into this movie. Like, there's characters that, or people that inspired Walter. Jackie Treehorn, a character that we haven't talked about in a ton of detail, who actually is one of the main players in the behind the scenes in a lot of this movie.
He's
pulling
kind
a lot
of
of strings.
Probably the most forgettable character.
Yeah.
I feel like I never think about Jackie Treehorn when I think about this movie.
No, but there's some really cool scenes with him in it. We didn't talk about, you know, when they go to his weird sex party, and then we go back to, like, his amazing mansion in Hollywood.
Oh God, yeah.
Like, which is a real actual mansion that has, like, a whole, I got real into details on that, but it's just, like, got a whole cool architecture thing going on. But even, like, in that scene, you know, where he does the North by Northwest thing, where he shades over
I was
and
thinking
it's just
about
a penis. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's, like, one of those amazing tiny details. But, like, they said that they wanted it to be Inca themed, and they wanted it to be a very Hollywood looking party. They were basically like, these are the parties that we have gone to in Hollywood, and we want to, like, put those on screen.
Nice.
Which is, yeah, I think that's really interesting, like, detail there. There's a lot of inspiration coming out of this. And I guess my thought of that is just, you know, write what you know. And the other thing I think that I found hilarious about all of this, and especially with Jeff Bridges' performance, is basically the Coen brothers were like, the only time that we had to direct Jeff Bridges, we had to tell him what to do, was he would actually come up to us at the beginning of every scene and say, did the dude burn one on the way over? And they would either say yes or no. And they were like, almost every time we said yes. And so he would go over and, like, start
Rub his
making
eyes, yeah.
red, yeah, and start getting in, like, that kind of brain
Stoner
space,
mind
yeah.
space.
Yeah.
That's pretty fucking funny, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think, again, casting is king. I don't think anyone other than Jeff Bridges could have played this character. I did a teeny tiny bit of research, and it looks like they actually wrote the script with Jeff Bridges in mind.
Oh, okay.
The Coen brothers.
Yeah.
So maybe there was no other fallback.
Yeah, you know what? Now that you say that, so I think that they very early on in the script actually reached out to Jeff Bridges and were like, we have this role for you.
Do you want it?
Yeah, and he actually was really hesitant about it. And part of why he was hesitant was he didn't want this character to be an influence on his kids at this time, because they were young kids.
That's actually kind of cute.
Yeah.
Wholesome.
Actually, as a side note, I was reading this, this is maybe one of the craziest things I've ever read about a movie, but Jeff Bridges actually invited his wife and kids to come watch him on set while they were making this movie, and it was the day that they were doing the dream sequence.
Oh my God.
And so everyone on set was like, are you insane? We're about to do the sequence where you fly under everybody's skirts and then flip up and look under everybody's skirts. What they ended up doing, they pranked him, and each girl in line, what they did was they taped a bunch of hair underneath there, so it was like it would get bulgier and bulgier and more hair down there. So every subsequent view, he was like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And they said it was hilarious, and that he was like, it's one of the funniest things that I've ever experienced on a set before.
He does have some truly, like, breathtaking reactions during that scene.
Yeah, that's such a funny scene. As a side note too, I just love the fact that they, like, incorporated weird dream sequences into this that have become, like, iconic in their own right. Like the carpet fly through, like
the magic carpet ride with Maud.
Yeah, like that's, like, one of the most iconic scenes. Like, you know, I remember that in How I Met Your Mother being, like, one of those, like, you know, great callbacks to that movie. Like, stuff like that have popped up so many times since.
Yeah, and then the whole gutter balls thing where he's being doing that, and then being chased by Peter Stormare with the giant scissors. Like, yeah, it's one of those things where, like, in any other movie, I'd be like, knock it off.
Yeah.
In this movie, though, I'm like, all right, proceed.
Yeah. Well, and it's cool because like everything in those scenes is basically like a callback to something going on in the background or in like in our face in earlier parts of the movie.
There's a lot to it. Really, it does encapsulate a lot of the themes of the movie really well too, and like all that stuff. So I mean, they swung for the fences and it hit.
Yeah. And actually, that's another point that I was kind of going to segue into this as well, is like the aesthetic, the thought process that goes into this, like cinematically and like just developing the sets and everything. Like they wanted all of the scenes to really like feel like you're in a bowling alley, like very brightly lit, very poppy, like bright colors kind of thing. Whereas everything else, like the dream sequences are like almost like a different movie. Like they're stylized very different, right?
It's a very sharp contrast.
Yeah. And I think that that's a really cool decision to make in that sense. And I think that a lot of the other Coen brothers movies are kind of similar in the sense that like they all feel like real lived in grimy worlds.
Yeah, absolutely.
And actually even like on the talking about some of the dream sequence stuff, like the rolling bowling ball where the dudes inside the bowling ball, that's actually like one of the toughest shots that they had in the entire movie was filming that. And they did it with like basically like a barbecue spit. Like they barbecue spit the camera and then they edited it so that there was like a bowling ball essentially around it. So there's just like the little peephole kind of thing.
Interesting.
The other thing that was kind of wild was that when they were throwing, John Goodman is throwing the ringer bag, the ringer for the ringer, through the window. He actually couldn't get it properly, and so what they ended up doing was they actually shot that in reverse. So they actually threw the bag into the car and then reversed it.
Oh, and he caught it.
Yeah.
Interesting. Huh.
Yeah.
I guess that's what we call movie magic.
Yeah, exactly.
Jesus.
Sequels, prequels, and reboots. So there is actually one other inspiration that I want to mention that this is not directly adapted from, but it's heavily inspired by the works of Raymond Chandler.
Yeah, the big film noir writer.
Yeah, I never actually heard of him before, but that's because I'm less into English than literature than you are.
For sure.
What the Coens said was that they wanted to do a Chandler kind of story, like how it moves kind of episodically through its world, how the characters kind of unravel the mystery as it goes on, and how as well that the plots of his stories are usually like insanely complicated, but also just unimportant as well.
Kinda, yeah. There's a famous story, I think it was The Big Sleep, where someone asked Raymond Chandler point blank, who shot the chauffeur? Because I guess a big plot in a big early plot point is this chauffeur for a limo getting shot. And Raymond Chandler just shrugged and said he had no idea. Or that I think he'd even completely forgotten about the chauffeur. So, yeah.
Well, and that's actually something that I thought was really cool too, is that like I hadn't heard of him before, but he's actually like not only is he an important writer, but The Big Sleep and The Long Goodbye are movies that are on our movie list for movies to cover at some point on this podcast.
Yeah, no, I mean, I saw The Big Sleep in film school and it's amazing.
Is it?
It's
cool.
when Humphrey Bogart's in it. Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't seen it. He also wrote the script for Double Indemnity.
Yeah, it's like considered one of the OG film noirs.
Yeah. And like so I just kind of blew my mind that like how connected he is to this film, right? And
even though he would have been dead for a long time when it came out.
Yeah,
so.
But I think that that's really cool, and I think I want to explore those movies. Like Double Indemnity is pretty high on our list of like the older movies to watch at some point.
Yeah, we should do that at some point.
And then in terms of sequels, the Coen brothers hate the idea of sequels, so they've never actually done a sequel to any of their movies. They're not like Quentin Tarantino either, where they kind of do like this bigger world in a sense, but there is a sequel to this movie, and it has no involvement of anybody except John Turturro.
Okay.
It's called The Jesus Rolls. You never heard of this?
No? What are you talking about?
It came out in 2019. It's directed by and starring John Turturro. It's literally centered around Jesus the entire movie. It's actually because part of the reason why is because John Turturro loves the character so much, but he was really disappointed that his character really only was written in for about 2 minutes.
Basically, yeah.
And so it's a remake of a 1974 French film called Going Places, but uses the character of Jesus in the narrative structure of that. And it got scathing reviews.
I don't think I have any interest in seeing it.
Not
even for curiosity. I think there are some characters that they only need 2 minutes.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I don't even... It's like, hey, you know that, like, weird comic relief character. Let's make a whole movie about him.
Yeah.
That almost never works.
No,
And it sounds like it didn't.
it did not, unfortunately, for John Turturro.
Sorry, buddy. Well, I admire the passion, but it also kind of sounds like a vanity project. But sorry, John, you're
Yeah.
a fine actor.
Yeah.
Please come on the podcast someday.
That'd be cool.
Well, if you come on the podcast, we will watch the movie and talk about it.
Something we haven't talked about yet. How hard the score of this movie goes.
Oh, yeah, it really does. Actually, I noticed the score.
Yeah.
That's how hard it goes. I
It's-
actually noticed.
It's a score that like it weaves its way through like so many genres, and it also is just like this cool classical music that's not like it's not music that you would go out of your way to listen to necessarily, but it's music that fits every scene incredibly well. It's also really like locked into the 1990s, early 90s like time period as well. And I think what's really also really interesting narratively is that every character has their own musical signature in this movie. One of my favorite ones actually is how the Jesus is introduced with the Spanish Hotel California playing.
Right.
I think that's the coolest rendition
Oh, yeah.
of that ever.
Yeah. Was
and-
that the original Hotel California?
No,
Or like,
no.
oh, right. It was you just said it was the Spanish version.
Yeah. I think this is the only time I've ever caught this, watching it this time for the podcast from a critical standpoint, is how it comes back later that the dude hates the Eagles, and that's an Eagles song, and so it's like a direct reference to like basically that song is playing in his head, and he's associating the Eagles with the character of Jesus, and so I think that that's a really cool callback, and again speaks to how tightly written this film is that really I don't think there's many points of dialogue that are just kind of throwaway points of dialogue unless it's like yelling at Donnie.
Yeah. That went completely over my head. I forgot that the Hotel California was an Eagles song.
Yeah, no,
But I do love how aggressively angry. Actually, there is like a 5 to 10 minute stretch later on in the movie where it's just the dude just keeps getting humiliated.
yeah,
Like knocked out, beat up, tossed out of cabs. And I think that is kind of like a throwback to the film noir thing.
yeah.
Where your protagonist is just getting the shit kicked out of him while trying to solve a mystery.
Well, and I think part of it is as well narratively it works also because the dude feels guilty about what they've done in throwing out the ringer.
Yeah.
And he carries around the phone with him, and he's really upset because he thinks that they've doomed Bunny essentially. And I think that him getting beaten up is like his paying for what he's done himself. Like I think that he looks at that way.
Kind of, yeah. It's also we're gearing up to the end of the second act, so that's usually
Yeah.
when bad things happen.
Right.
It's usually when shit goes wrong.
Yep. I also want to shout out the song just dropped in to see what condition my condition was in.
Oh, yeah. That one.
Because that song rocks really hard, and I didn't know that it was a Kenny Rogers song because I think everyone just thinks of Kenny Rogers as the gambler, but I never knew that was a Kenny Rogers song, and I think that's really cool, so I want to shout that out.
Congratulations, Kenny Rogers.
There's also Viva Las Vegas is like Bunny's signature song, which is awesome because that's Bunny's character essentially, like all like surface and no depth. It's also like a funny callback to the Flintstones and John Goodman playing the Flintstones in Viva Rock Vegas.
That is quite a stretch. Congratulations, Blake. You pulled it off.
The last musical note that I want to make is that there was a cover of the Dead Flowers Rolling Stones song by Townes Van Zandt,
Okay.
which plays on the closing credits. And so it was actually owned by the Stones manager, Alan Klein, and he wanted $150,000 for them to use the rights to the song. They couldn't afford that, obviously, with the budget, because that's a big number for a musical piece for 2 minutes.
Right.
What they ended up doing was they ended up convincing him to watch an early cut of the film. And when the dude says, "I fucking hate the Eagles," he stood up and said, "That's it, you can have my song." And I think he didn't charge them anything for it because of that. So
Wow, interesting. Okay.
And actually, the Eagles are really upset by this movie and the fact that he calls them out on it. And I believe it was one of the bandmates once saw Jeff Bridges at an event and got really mad at him about it. So
Okay.
you know those art types.
Yeah, I do. Very well.
This is just perfect score. Like, I don't think you could change anything to the score to make it better. and it holds up incredibly well as well.
Sometimes when I notice scores, it's for a bad reason because
Yeah.
something isn't going wrong, something isn't clicking, and I'm
It's like The Third Man, when you and I both kind of like
disliked
bounced off of that, even though it's like a classical song.
yeah, and I think we're the only two people in history who were brave enough to say, "Hey, come on!" But
Yeah.
yeah, no, this had a great score. I like it a lot.
Look back at the times. Very mixed critical reception at the time. I think a lot of, the bigwigs, the people who wrote about movies, had a really hard time dissecting this and understanding how to think about this movie.
Yeah, which I can't even really blame them for because it is.
I think it's a movie that gets better on rewatches as well.
No, it's a great movie, and I loved it. But I think you also have to be a very specific kind of person to
Yeah.
really. And I think for the time, too, it must have been a little preposterous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's probably the most F-bombs in a movie at that point in time, right? I believe it held the record until like Wolf of Wall Street. So.
Actually, I checked. That's the one point of research I did. I think right now it's number 30.
Really?
Yeah.
Number 30?
Number 30. Something for like, they did the math and it's like 2.8 fucks per minute.
Yeah, and he says man like 1.4 times per minute or something.
Yeah.
I also say that this is the only critique, the only time that I'm going to critique this perfect movie.
Okay.
Is I hate the poster of this movie.
Oh, with the two. I was actually just looking at it. The two of them standing.
It doesn't matter which one you pick. There's multiple posters. There's him with Maud bowling. There's the dude and Walter together. And there's a third one. The best one is probably the black and white dude's close-up face, but the carpet is like colored and it's on his glasses. That's the best poster of The Big Lebowski.
Okay, I was only aware of the one with him and Walter. Now I have to look at these other ones. Yeah, no. I see what you mean. All three of them aren't perfect.
No. They're not great movie posters, and so I could imagine that's part of the weird appeal at the beginning, right? Is like trying to understand who this movie's for, where they're not like the best posters. And I haven't honestly, like, there's some fan posters online too, and I just haven't singled in on any one that really speaks to me.
No, it's kind of like, I remember one of my friends wrote this short film, and him and I spent hours trying to come up with a title for this fucking thing.
Mm-hmm.
And to this day, we have never come up with a title for it. And it's one of the great failures of my professional life. And sometimes still I'll like think it over in my head, like, what if we called it this?
Yeah.
It's just nothing we can come up with fully puts the right capstone on it. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So,
and
yeah, and it's funny, like the black and white one with the rug almost looks like more of a drama, I guess.
Yeah.
And then the one with him standing with Walter it could almost be mistaken for like a Kevin Smith movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like especially Walter's got his gun out, so like it might look like a weird action movie too.
Yeah, and the yellow doesn't work for me at all. Like it just
Nah.
looks not great.
It just looks not great. It really doesn't tie the movie together.
It doesn't at all.
And then the one with him and Maud for when they're in their like dream sequence.
Yeah.
Theater clothes is just that's a gutter ball right there. Oh.
And so I think that part of the legacy of this movie is how it grew to become a cult hit over time, right? Like this is considered one of the greatest cult classic movies of all time. Like it's a movie that came out in 1998, but I think it was like 2002 before this started really taking off. And like there's been thousands upon thousands of like midnight screenings of this. Like,
oh yeah.
Somebody, I think one of the Coen brothers was going to the movies to go see something, and people were coming out of
The Big Lebowski.
Yeah. And like telling him about The Big Lebowski and how great it is to go see it with people, and like, you know, how into it the crowd gets and everything. Like this is probably a number one like go see in theater if it ever came to a theater again.
This is the kind of movie you should watch with other people.
Oh, absolutely.
When I bumble ass backwards into my next relationship, it's gonna be one of the first movies I make her watch. That poor woman.
Yeah, vibe check right there. It's really, really good. Like it's actually even something that like Roger Ebert originally only gave 3 out of 4 stars, and actually in 2010 revised it to be 4 out of 4 and put it in his great movies list.
I respected that about Roger Ebert, that he was willing to like revise opinions after the fact.
I mean, it was a pretty good review for like a stoner comedy. A 3 out of 4 is like a pretty good review for
That's
Roger Ebert.
True, actually, yeah.
So to move it up to 4 over 4 over time, like he had the same experience with me. It's just every watch is just adds something to it.
Yeah, and it's one of the most quotable movies of all time.
Yeah.
Like, I'm a huge Dragon Ball Z abridged fan. And like even that show will drop lines from The Big Lebowski.
Really?
Yeah, really.
That's wild.
Yeah, no, they will drop lines in from The Big Lebowski. It's hilarious.
And then, so, from the period of 2002 to 2018, they actually held a Lebowski Fest in Louisville, Kentucky.
Oh my God.
It was a thing for a long time.
I think I did hear about this. Didn't Jeff Bridges actually show up at one point?
Yeah, many of the cast have shown up to Lebowski Fest.
What's interesting is, and again, okay, I did do a little tiny bit of research. I think the cast loves this movie, but the directors themselves, the Coen brothers, aren't actually as into it as everyone else.
Yeah, they're kind of like not indifferent necessarily, but they're like, it was a good movie. We made it and we're happy with it. But I think that there are other films on their filmography that they're more proud of. And that was actually a question I had for you, because it sounds like you're probably in the same boat as me, where you've probably watched a third of the Coen brothers filmography.
Probably less than that.
Yeah,
I fell off them a bit.
I'm a third of the way through their filmography, and if it were me, like my current, and like I said, I'm missing a lot of Coen brothers movies, but my top 3 are The Big Lebowski, because it's like a top 5 movie for me, No Country for Old Men, top 50 movie for me, and then Fargo, probably in like the late 90s.
I would probably replicate the same order.
Yeah.
I need to watch True Grit again, and then there's a bunch of other ones I need to see.
Yeah, True Grit even has like pretty high critical acclaim, I believe. Like, I think it's like considered one of the better
remakes of all time.
Yeah,
and it's also got Jeff Bridges. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean,
the ones that I need to see at some point that I've heard are like incredible are like Raising Arizona. I've seen Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, and that movie is really good. But I think Raising Arizona, Miller's Crossing, Barton Fink, like the 3 older OG movies of theirs I haven't seen and would really like to.
Yeah, maybe we need to spin off and do a new podcast where we review Coen brothers movies.
Oh, that'd be such a good time.
Have you heard the rumor about do you remember the Garfield movie from like 2003?
Yep.
And that had Bill Murray in it?
Mm-hmm.
Have you heard the catastrophe behind that?
No.
Bill Murray signed on for the Garfield movie because the screenwriter was somebody named Coen.
Oh my god.
And he thought it was a Coen brothers movie.
Could you imagine a Garfield Coen brothers movie?
Yeah, that would have been hilarious. But yeah, no, it was, and like it was spelled differently. I think the guy who wrote the Garfield movie, it was like he had an H in his name. It was
like Coehn.
Yeah, something like that. So he agreed to it because
yeah.
he wanted to work with the Coen brothers, and then he very quickly realized this was not that movie.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's what happens when you don't have an agent and you take phone calls.
Yeah, and that's how you get your you just have a voicemail box.
That's hilarious.
Sorry, Bill Murray, you can't win them all.
Other stuff that came out of this movie, not the Garfield, Dudism. We've already talked about it briefly, but it was formed in 2005 and has 500,000 Dudist priests ordained worldwide.
In some jurisdictions, you can actually officiate weddings as a Dudist priest.
Yeah, that's maybe the greatest piece of knowledge that you and I have.
I'm surprised I didn't officiate your wedding with that knowledge.
I would have done it, or I would have had you do it.
Yeah, for sure.
Now it's sitting on the IMDb list, greatest 250 movies of all time, at number 211, which is probably not high enough, but also, like you said, this isn't a movie for 100% of people, so that's why it's sitting a little bit lower there.
I would bump it higher.
Yeah. I mean, for both of us, it's like in our top 5, top 10.
Top 5, top 3.
Yep. So there's a weird debate online as to whether this movie is a Western or a crime.
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah.
It's like, is Die Hard a Christmas movie or not?
Yes.
Yeah. I gotta go with crime.
That's funny. I was going to go Western.
Oh, really? Okay. This is where our paths diverge.
Yeah, that's hilarious.
No, I gotta go with crime. Like, it follows a lot of the film noir conventions.
Right.
Even the plot is very film noir, mystery. So, I mean, yeah, that's where I'm going.
I'm not going to make an argument because I'm starting to fade on this one. But
Okay. I mean, I will concede that it has some like Western-y influences. I mean, like The Stranger, even the two of them like sitting at the bar together,
Yeah.
like stuff like that.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's a little bit episodic, like some of the westerns that I've seen can be. Yeah, I don't know.
Episodic. Yeah, no, I gotta go like it's almost like neo-noir, like a parody of a film noir, you
Yeah.
know? But then it's also just so much more of the sum of its parts and so hard to define.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's everything I want to talk about. So our personal reviews and the partner factor. We've already kind of talked about this. Like this is
Kinda, yeah.
yeah, like this is a classic. This is one of our both of our favorite movies of all time. One of them. Like I said, this has been a very influential film on my life, my philosophy on life.
I think there's a lot of good things from this movie.
Yeah.
Right? You know, it's
Such a good feel good movie.
it really
It's a shame Donnie had to die, but
it's a shame Donnie had to die, but hey, say friend, do you have any more of that good sarsaparilla?
I don't know if I've ever had a sarsaparilla.
I don't even know what a sarsaparilla is. Is it like root beer or something?
Yes, I think it is root based, but don't quote me on that.
Is it alcoholic or is it just
I gotta imagine it is.
I'm going to Google that right now.
All right, well, we got to wrap it up before this podcast episode has already gone on very long.
Oh, it's sarsaparilla. According to Wikipedia, sarsaparilla is a soft drink made from the vine Similax aurantia. So it's a soft drink.
So it's a pop.
Yeah, it's a pop.
Soft drink. What are you, American?
Yeah, get out of here. Where's the Canadian version of Wikipedia?
Gross. Soft drink. Ugh. Spit that shit out.
No, thank you. All right. Well,
on that note, life does not stop and start at your convenience, but this podcast can be stopped and started at any point in time. And I think we're going to put the closing touches on it right now.
absolutely.
See you next time.
Next time, I guess.
Tell your dad.
Well, maybe not this one, but tell your dad.
I think my dad would have a lot of fun with this one.
Actually, your dad would really like it. My dad, I don't remember if he liked it or not.
Yeah.
So
You know what? My dad would still probably call this one weird. He probably like if you asked him after watching it, he'd probably laugh and go, "That was really weird." But it would be like,
in an admiring way.
yeah, that's
like,
what he does when he
"Ah."
likes a movie. He's like, "Oh, that was really weird," and that's like the Al stamp of approval on a movie.
By the way, Blake's your dad just got Facebook,
Yeah, I know.
and we just became Facebook friends. This
Wow.
morning. Yeah.
No way.
Me
Congrats.
and yeah.
I'm sure he would love if you just like post on his wall every week or so.
I will probably. Hey, Al, look at this.
Oh man, that's awesome. Okay, well, we'll see you next time. I think next month is Actress Month, so I'm excited to do that. I think Jason and I are probably going to take on that one.
Cool.
So we've been doing that for a couple years, and it's always a good time.
Cool.
All right, see you next time.
Bye.